Okay, we are good. And here we go. What is the state of American health?
Bad and getting worse. I mean, that's about as simple as I can put it. And it seems like the more money we spend, the worse it gets, which tells us that the problem is not resources. The problem is misallocation of resources.
What are your thoughts on the first year of COVID-19 from February 2020 to February 2021? In other words, what happened, why it happened, and what's next?
Oh, from my book, COVID Operation, which I have right here. Um, what happened was a very planned, well planned, I might add, illusion that we were having a pandemic. There was no pandemic. There wasn't in February of last year. There isn't now. All of this was orchestrated for reasons that we can talk about if you like, but this was not anything to do with health. It was everything to do with government control and political reasons and that sort of thing. Um, the fact that it turned into that so many people believed it, including health professionals, really goes to your first question, which is what is the state of American health? It's terrible. And it's terrible because we have health professionals who aren't very well educated to understand the medical literature, let alone understand what's going on here, and people who are easily persuaded with health information that's patently false. And it's been going on for a long time. This is just the biggest episode of it. In other words, for 25 years that I've been in business, I've been talking about medical tyranny and informed consent, okay? Informed decision making, where people look at risks and benefits and analyze information and make objective, not subjective decisions about their health. This is not the way healthcare is practiced. But if it were, this could never have happened because everybody would have known right away what was going on.
What are your thoughts on this passage from Gary Taubes, author of The Case for Keto? Keto diets are based on the proposition that for those predisposed to become obese and or diabetic, carbohydrate-rich foods trigger that predisposition. That isn't because of the calories they contain, as the conventional thinking on obesity assumes, but because of the effect these foods have on insulin, the hormone that dominates the regulation of fat storage and fat metabolism. Insulin is secreted mostly in response to carbohydrates, not just in the form of sugars, starches, and grains, whole or otherwise, but also fruits and legumes, which are the staples of a well-formulated plant-based diet. A high insulin level signals fat synthesis and storage, and a low level, its release as free fatty acid back into the circulation. Observed the Harvard University metabolism and diabetes researcher George F. Cahill Jr. in 1971 in the prestigious Banting Memorial Lecture at the annual meeting of the American Diabetes Association. This process is like a switch. When fat cells sense the presence of insulin in the circulation, as Cahill described, they respond by storing fat and inhibiting its release, and we get fatter. When insulin is undetectable, we burn stored fat for fuel, and we get leaner. The metabolic state of ketosis, from which the keto diet gets its name, happens when carbohydrates are restricted almost entirely and fat provides most of the fuel for the body. The hormonal insulin-centric regulation of fat storage and fat metabolism remains textbook medicine, yet its relevance to obesity has been effectively ignored by nutritionists and obesity researchers who have overwhelmingly preferred to think that all calories are equally capable of stimulating fat accumulation, that we get fat because we overeat, not because the carbohydrates we consume have some unique ability to stimulate fat accumulation. For some significant proportion of Americans, however, remaining relatively lean and healthy may require minimizing their insulin secretion. This, in turn, means more or less rigid abstinence from carbohydrate-rich foods. Animal-sourced foods, meat, fish, fowl, and even processed meat, typically make up the bulk of this approach to weight control because they are almost entirely protein and fat, with minimal carbohydrates. Until insulin was discovered in 1921 and insulin therapy was put to use in treating diabetes, these diets were known as animal diets. They were the standard of care for diabetes, delaying death in what today is called type 1 diabetes, the insulin-dependent form, and controlling the disease indefinitely in those with type 2, the common form associated with excess weight and age. This is still the case. So again, what are your thoughts on this passage from Gary Taubes?
Oh my gosh, where do we begin? Well, I guess the place that I would start is that the ketogenic diet does have some application for, and this would be a long discussion, for treating cancer patients who have very short life expectancy. And it's been used for decades for toddlers who have epilepsy, certain types of epilepsy. And the purpose with toddlers who have epilepsy is to put them into the equivalent of a fasting state for a couple, 3 years, which resolves in most cases, it reduces or resolves the epilepsy. Now, we have some very good data following up these children who would be throughout life, and they spend their whole life overcoming the damage that is done during the 2 to 3 years that they spend on the ketogenic diet, okay? So why would a parent put a 2-year-old on this diet? Because if you have a child who's taking medication and still having 50 seizures a day, this child isn't going to have a life. All right. So my work is all about evaluate the risks and benefits and then decide what is the best thing to do. And given the options, this is a better option than the alternative, a medicated person who can't leave home ever, not have a life. But having said that, you spend the rest of your life recovering from it, right? Now, to be put in a state of ketosis, you have to measure your ketones, you have to weigh and measure everything that you eat. When these children, and I'll get to what this has to do with your question, but when these children, for example, eat a cracker, they seizure out. So you know right away that they've gone out of ketosis. So we have all these people living in the normal world here who say they're on a ketogenic diet. They're not measuring, weighing anything. They're just eating a lot of fat. All right. So first of all, they're not generating the state that Taubes is suggesting people need to be in order to benefit from this. They're just eating fat. And we've had cancer patients who've joined Wellness Forum who, when our dietitians took a look at their food journals, they weren't in a state of ketosis, so they never got any benefit from eating this high-fat diet. They were just eating a lot of fat. So Taubes misleads people, and his buddies mislead people into thinking you just start eating a high-fat diet and then you're there. The second thing that I want to say about this is that this whole notion that insulin secretion in response to eating beans and potatoes and fruit is somehow bad for you, and grains and that sort of thing is ridiculous. This is normal. This is the way humans operate. All right. You eat carbohydrate, some of it becomes glucose. It has to get into the cells. That's the energy currency of the cell. You're going to need insulin to make that happen. We don't want to stop that process. The problem that people have is not that they're eating a high carbohydrate diet. It's that they're eating a high fat, high protein, junk food carbohydrate diet. In other words, again, if you were to bring our dietitians in here to talk about this, and they're looking at food journals all day long, all right, what they would tell you is they see animal food 2 to 3 times a day, white bread to make the sandwich, white flour pasta, toaster pastries, this is what is going on in the American diet. And I laugh when I hear these people say, yeah, the people who are coming to see me are all eating a whole foods plant-based diet, and they're fat and they have high insulin levels and they're diabetic. Those are not the diabetic overweight people. So this is just ludicrous. And I want to say something else. Gary Taubes is a reporter, used to be, I don't know if he still is, with the New York Times. He developed an interest in health because I think he started covering health as part of his, what he was doing for the Times. But he has no clue what he's talking about. And by the way, I don't play the expert or credentials game because we have some Harvard and Cornell educated doctors who mislead the public every day. So this isn't a matter of the credentials make the person credible. It's a matter of the person's understanding of physiology and health. And he doesn't understand that. All right. He routinely makes patently false statements. I mean, we could take the entire 90 minutes we have here and take apart that paragraph or several paragraphs that he wrote And I can show you where he's patently false. And he's probably because he's never taken anatomy, he's never taken physiology, he's never taken biochemistry and chemistry, and he's never really studied how people become diabetic, because this whole idea that you're predisposed to become diabetic and eating carbohydrate turns it on. Well, the Chinese have been eating a high carbohydrate diet for thousands of years. They only recently started becoming diabetic. Why? Because of the Western diet, not because of the carbohydrate. So even from an epidemiological observational standpoint, what he's saying is patently false, and you can just go country by country and prove it.